At least 83% of U.S. marketers say that they find webinars to be both practically and cost effective. On average, the attendance rate for webinars is roughly 40%, with 40% of attendees attending the entire webinar. However, since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, companies have witnessed an increase of 87% in attendance for webinars, according to Zippia. Brian Drake is the founder and CEO of Sellaquest, a webinar consulting agency. At Sellaquest, they believe that you're the CEO of your company, and their company is your new VP of Sales. As for Drake himself, he believes that he is the student of the world and that effective communication is the most important skill any one person could learn. So naturally, Drake joined me this week to talk about webinars, effective communication, and what it means to be a great business leader, and how we can use communication to enhance our business game. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to talk to you this afternoon all about webinars, my friend. Great to see you, and thank you for a few minutes.
Yeah, of course, Kevin. I was honestly honored when you reached out to invite me onto your show, so I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, Brian, I know, just before we dive into webinars, buddy, I know that you believe, just like me, because I was a communications and journalism major, that effective communication is one of the strongest and most important skills that anyone can develop. So I'm wondering if we could start our conversation that way and tell me why you believe that authentic communication is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my story starts like this. When I started as an entrepreneur, I was about 4 months into my journey, and I was having trouble with clients. I was striking out when it came to sales conversations, and I was really struggling to really build connections with people. And I know that a big part of entrepreneurship is just growing those connections. Well, about 4 months into my journey, I do this post on social media. And after the post was done, I get this message in my inbox from a friend of mine. And she says, "Hey, Brian, that post that you just did, it didn't make any sense." And so I was like, okay, well, thank you for your honesty. I turned around and I rewrote the post and I said, "Hey, does this make sense?" And then she got back to me and she's like, maybe you should try saying it out loud to see if it makes more sense. So at that moment, I decided that I needed to work on my communication. That was something I knew it was important, but it wasn't something I put any time or effort into. So then I started doing courses and I started doing different programs and I started to develop the skill of being able to communicate. And things started to change. I was finding myself getting compliments a lot on my communication, and I started to feel more self-confident. I started to feel like when I was engaging in conversations with people that I just felt more confident about myself because I knew that I was communicating better than I was before. But here was the problem. The problem is that I still wasn't making any money. I was still striking out with clients. And the people that were coming into my life, they were kind of just coming in and out. So I realized that what was holding me back in my communication was my mindset. It's a really tough thing to bridge when it comes to mindset. But the minute you go from being a selfish communicator, which is what I was, to a selfless communicator, the entire world, your life completely changes. And now I can engage in pretty much any sales conversation. And the connections that I've built with people are very real and they're very strong. And now I have this network of people that I'm just surrounded myself with. And I just feel so blessed. And I owe it to the art of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that your entrepreneurial journey, but it started when you were 4 years old, standing outside in your driveway selling painted rocks to your neighbors, buddy. And then you developed your first business idea when you were 21, sitting at a desk, and you got your first business off the ground when you were 34. So tell me all about your entrepreneurial journey. It sounds like it's fascinating.
Yeah, I guess you can say it must be in my blood somewhere. 4 years old, instead of playing with toys, I wanted to, try to make money. And it wasn't until I was 21 years old, I sat down and wrote my first business plan for a company that I just made up, and it rented bounce houses. And I say I wrote a business plan, but it was just me writing stuff down to think, like, if I wrote a business plan, this is what it would look like, right? Well, shortly after I wrote that business plan, I got a job at the largest bank in the United States. And next thing you know, I'm making $120,000 a year. I'm being recognized as one of the top salespeople. And the job was really good. And I worked in this giant building that had windows that were just everywhere. It was a huge lobby I'd walk around in, and there was just windows pretty much on every single wall. And part of my job, I had to walk back and forth in front of these windows. Well, there were times that I would just stop and I would look outside and I would just wonder, like, what if I actually tried to pursue the life of entrepreneurship? What if I actually really gave it a shot? And at the same time I was feeling that, I was also feeling like I was in prison. Just like in school where you can't leave, sometimes I'd look out those windows and realize that I couldn't walk out those doors even if I wanted to. So this was my life for 10 years. And the cubicle that I worked in just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So one day I was looking at my 401k and I realized that I had enough in that 401k after 10 years of work that I could pursue entrepreneurship for 1 year. That would be that would be my timeline. So I walked over to my boss, I handed him my 2 weeks notice, and I did it. And it scared the hell out of me to actually walk away from this job. So that's been my life. And that decision was October of 2021. And so it has now been a year and 2 months that I'm into that journey. And so here I am today.
Buddy, I'm also curious to ask you about how you felt when you made that decision to really bet on yourself and take the leap into entrepreneurship. Because, as you said, you're at a well-paying job. So talk me through that decision-making process and sort of betting on yourself.
So it wasn't a great experience at first. Once I lost the structure that I had in my life, the routine, where it wasn't just the routine of just having a job and getting paid. It was the same routine that I'd had since, I started kindergarten. It was, you go to school, you're in there for 8 hours, you can't really go anywhere. And then on the weekends, you can enjoy yourself. And that, we're talking 34 years of being conditioned to live this sort of lifestyle. The minute I stepped away with it, I'm 24 hours into my journey, Kevin, and I'm feeling like there's no foundation under me. I'm feeling like I'm in a free fall. And I'm freaking out. I mean, I was freaking out. A part of me felt proud of the decision I made and excited to take on the future. But adjusting to a life of entrepreneurship was really tough. I started having anxiety attacks because I was having a hard time mentally disconnecting from the only life that I knew. So
yeah, absolutely. And now take me into a typical day of a webinar consultant, buddy, because I know that each individual day isn't the same, right? So tell me about a typical day in the life. I'm fascinated to find that.
So my day now starts. The morning is more about my family and my kids. Now, instead of starting my work day, my day starts at 7 a.m. I take my son to school and, my daughter when I have her. And then I spend time with my 2-year-old. And so I pretty much have the morning until about 11 o'clock. Now, from 11 to 5, I'm focusing on the webinar business. Now, when I say focusing, there's one thing that is important to me right now in my business, and that is showing people that I am capable of creating great webinars. The reality is, I studied webinars, I read books on webinars, I did courses on webinars. I have a framework that I can use to build a webinar. But the problem is, no one's actually seen one of my webinars. Nobody's experienced one yet. So from 11 to 5, I'm putting all of my effort into building a webinar for myself. And it's a webinar I'm going to use to teach communication. Once I'm done with that webinar, I'll be inviting people, if they're interested, in working with me to build webinars for them. But to me, I can talk till I'm blue in the face and convince people that let me do a webinar for you. But unless they experience one for themselves, there's always going to be that certain level of self-doubt. So my day right now is all into building one for myself. And then I'll be presenting it at least once a week for as long as it takes.
To gain traction, yeah. And by the way, I took a look at your company tagline and I found it to be fascinating. So tell me about the tagline, because I know that you really want to empower people by telling them that they're the CEO of their company and you're their new sort of
the VP of sales.
VP of sales. So tell me about the tagline, buddy. I'm fascinated.
Well, as soon as you asked me prior to this, you were going to be bringing up my tagline, I actually changed it. And I changed it because if I want people to see me as somebody that's going to help them make money, then I'm not necessarily doing a good service, because that's not what I truly believe when it comes to creating webinars. I don't believe creating webinars is about actually making money, because that's kind of the end goal. I'm going to try to backpedal here real quick. When I first presented a webinar idea to somebody, I talked with them about their end result. What is it that they wanted out of the webinar? And we built the webinar around getting people to that end result, which was growing their community. What I realized is that the only way a webinar can truly work is if the focus is 100% on transforming the lives of the people that are in the audience. And in order to do that, you have to put everything you can into helping them download information that's already in your mind to help them see life through your eyes and help give them hope for the future. So my new tagline is this. I actually wrote it down, so I'm going to grab it. Great question, by the way, Kevin.
Well,
I appreciate you asking me that.
That's the power of research, right?
That's right. So my new tagline is an unforgettable webinar experience. If I build a webinar for somebody, and as I build a webinar for myself, if the people that are in attendance walk away feeling like the lens in their life has changed and it was an experience that they'll never forget, I consider that a win. I do not consider a win a webinar that gets a lot of people to buy something.
Well, it's all about making a transformational difference, my friend. And
That's right.
Since we're on that track, tell me, what does it mean to you to make a transformational difference in someone's life?
That's a great question. It means that that person during the interaction, something was presented to them, a new lens that there's no going back from. That is a moment in their life where they now see things differently and they see how things were before, and they're more excited about the future because they now have a new lens to see the world through. I'm on this journey right now of understanding the psychology when it comes to communicating. And the thing is, and I'm realizing this quickly, you can't tell somebody what they're doing is wrong and then try to replace it with the right thing of doing. If I tell somebody, hey, you're talking too much when you're communicating, if you communicate less, these are the benefits. As soon as I say what you've been doing is wrong, they're just going to shut down. They're not going to listen. And even if they're getting good advice, it's not something they're going to hang on to. So the question I'm asking myself right now is, how do you introduce an idea to somebody that I know can transform their life without first making them feel defensive and making them feel like what they've been doing is wrong? So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and to that point, buddy, I shared with you before this started that I'm all about diversity, equity, and inclusion for folks with disabilities. So when you look at DE&I from a entrepreneurial standpoint, how do you think we can include more people with disabilities and make business more inclusive?
Well, I think the question really needs to be not necessarily like, what is it we need as a company or as entrepreneurs? Like, what do we really need when it comes to the diversity, inclusion, including people with disabilities? It's all about, what are the challenges with people with disabilities facing, and what do they desire? How can we help empower them? Here you are doing this podcast, which is fantastic, and you're getting yourself out there and you're bringing awareness. You're living to your desire. So as entrepreneurs and as businesses, the question becomes, what can we do to help empower, individuals with disabilities? Because in return, if we help empower individuals, whether they have a disability or not, if we help empower individuals, they will return that to us. It'll pay it back in massive dividends.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and finish your point. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, if companies focus more on not necessarily how hiring somebody with disabilities or just anybody in general can benefit them, if they simply just look at human beings for who they are and figure out, how can I help, then ultimately their company will grow to what they want it to be, and it'll grow with a much more, I guess you could say, empowered environment for the people that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, as I shared with you, I have a unique passion and purpose for the art of communication, and I really think webinars are a unique way to still communicate with people. So tell me, how effective of a communication tool do you think a webinar is actually? I'm fascinated to get your answer.
So how impactful can a webinar be, or like how effective as a communication tool? Is that what you're asking?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay. So it really comes down, and this I believe can be in any platform, but it really comes down to the intention of the webinar. The reality is this, Kevin. Most webinars, the approach to it is, let's try to give the audience value. Let's introduce ourselves. Let's give them something of value, something they can learn. And then let's try to sell them something. Let's try to onboard them with something. And the problem with that is that mindset drives a webinar that falls flat. It completely falls flat. So a webinar can be the most impactful tool when it comes to impacting people's lives, but that has to be the intention of it. The first thing when you create a webinar is, what do I want the outcome of this webinar to be? What do I want the outcome for the audience? What are they going to be able to do now that they couldn't do before, or know something now that they didn't know before? And why is that going to benefit their life? How am I going to make the time that they're here worth it to them and pay dividends for them for years to come?
Yeah.
If the webinar,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, if the webinar is built on that core, like, okay, let's figure out that question, and then it's just breaking it down to a step-by-step process. Where communication gets disconnected here is people just communicate the information without being mindful of the most important strategy when it comes to communicating the information, and that is to always treat a webinar as if you're communicating it to a group of like fifth graders. Having the concepts very simple, the sentences very simple, the words, have everything so simple that you're not losing any of your audience.
Yeah, and to that point, so if I gave you like, I don't know, $1,000 to create a course to to develop the perfect webinar. Tell me the top 3 things you would put in the course that anyone can follow to make a great webinar.
So to make sure I'm clear, so is the question like if I was to teach, let's say for $1,000, if I was to teach how to do webinars, what are the top 3 things that I think are important that I would teach?
Yeah, what would you put in the course? Yeah.
Oh gosh, so good question. I would put in the understanding of the different sections of a webinar. The webinar has 4 sections, right? There's the introduction, there's the content piece of it, then there's the transition, and then there's the pitch. So webinars in 4 pieces. What I would do is I would break down each category and try to help people understand the importance and the objective of each one of those sections. So if you ask me what the objective of the introduction was, that is to frame who the host is in the minds of the audience. Like, who is this host? What is their background? Why are they qualified to teach what they're about to teach or explain what they're about to explain? And am I going to feel excited about what they're about to teach me? So it's about framing the host, but also setting the foundation for what the entire presentation is going to be. Then the content piece, that's where you actually teach people, and there's a strategy that is what I believe is a very effective way of teaching people, and it's just in a simple step-by-step process. Then there's the transition where you kind of set the audience up and say, hey, this is everything that I taught you. This is all the value you got. Let me remind you. Now, would you agree that your life is now going to be different moving forward? Would you agree that the skills that I just taught you are going to be impactful? Are you excited to take on the future? And you get them just like really filled with gratitude for everything that you just did. And then you let them know that there's some additional resources or programs, whatever it is that's actually being sold, and giving them the option, not shoving it down their throat, but transitioning them and then just giving them the option. Here's what we have for you. Here's why it'll work for you. Here's what's included. And then give them the space to be able to really think, like, based off of what I just learned, does this make sense to move forward with?
Yeah, and Brian, I'm also fascinated to ask you, what do you think from doing this work will be your greatest sort of point of impact on the lives of other people? How do you hope to be an inclusive voice for everyone through the work that you do? What do you think will be your moment of most impact?
So that's such a good question, Kevin. Love that you asked that. And I believe it's this. Through my work, it'll be meaningful for me, or to be impactful for me, is if the people I work with start to see communication differently and start to see other people's lives differently and their own lives differently. And this is to go without saying, and this is, I'm going to try to be very careful here with my words. I apologize if I offend any of your audience or offend you, but most people are selfish. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. Most people are selfish, which is okay. We all have goals. We all have desires. We all have something that we want. On the surface, we have what we present as what our motivations are. This is why I'm motivated. This is why I do things. This is how I'm going to help people. This is the life that, I want to contribute to. Wording this very terribly. But then there's a different desire. And I call it the mind desire and the heart desire. The mind desires what they want other people to believe that they desire. But then the heart desires something else. And the reality is that if you can't align those two, if your heart desires something differently that is on the selfish side, then no matter what you do, that will always come through in your communication, whether it's through webinars, whether it's through talking to somebody one-on-one, whether it's talking to a group, the desire you have in your heart will always come through. My goal in the perfect world is anybody I work with on a webinar understands the importance of shifting their heart's desire, and it's to take their desire externally and to worry and to focus their mind and their spirit on other people's lives and helping them rather than what's going to benefit them in their own life. If I do that, that would be a huge win for me. If somebody tells me, like, I've changed the way that I see communication, human beings, and what it really means to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the flip side of that, how do you think business people, for any business person who may be watching this can maximize sort of the effectiveness of a webinar to reach the most amount of people?
So again, it really comes down to the most important piece of the webinar, and that's the transformation piece. What is it? Why are these people going to, benefit? And here's the thing that I think is also going to be helpful is there's a difference between what we believe to be true and what is actually true. Part of the reason why some webinars fail is because we believe that what we're about to share is going to be impactful for the audience. We believe they're going to be excited to join a webinar. We believe that it's going to help solve their problems. The problem is that if we actually go and talk with them, we might get a different answer. But because our belief is this is what we see, it's what we look for. And it makes actually hearing what they're saying and what they want a little difficult. So to answer your question, if we want to help people join a webinar, if we want to help people actually be impacted by the webinar, it's truly knowing not just we believe this is what they want and this is what they need to hear, but it's knowing it for fact because it came from their mouth. That you share, hey, I'm doing a webinar. This is the transformation you can expect. If you don't get 100 people out of 1,000 that are excited, let me rephrase that. If you don't get 500 out of 1,000 people that are excited, then it's kind of going back and saying, okay, I need to revisit this. My belief needs to be challenged because it's not true. Once you can align what people actually want and they desire and put that into your webinar and then help figure out how to communicate that in a way that they're excited and that it makes sense and that it's simple, that's when your webinar, it doesn't really matter how well you market it. The people that join the webinar will just start marketing it for you. Because if it changed their life, they want to share that with other people. That's the performance indicator that will tell you as a webinar presenter if your webinar is actually impacting. How many people are referring other people to join yours?
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, based on your personal and professional experience, my friend, I'm curious to ask you about what do you think makes an effective leader? Because there are different forms of leadership that are effective for different people. So tell me, in your opinion, what makes an effective leader?
So to answer that question, the first thing a leader needs to know is who they want to lead. A leader can't be a leader of everybody because then they're a leader of nobody. The next point is if you make the decision on who you want to lead, the question that becomes, what do you really understand about those people? Not what you believe about those people, but what do you actually understand about those people? That group of people, what's important to them? What do they desire? What struggles are they going through in their life, and what is it they want? If you can listen to them in an unbiased way where you're not assuming anything and you're just allowing information to be taken in, then a leader communicates to what they're actually being told. And a leader never tries to make a situation where it's about them, where they're the center of attention. Anytime they communicate, it is always externally. I'm saying something in a certain way to help you in your life and on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, I'm going to combine my next and final question to you.
Sure.
Because I'm fascinated to ask you, what do you think your life mission is? And juxtapose that to what do you want your legacy to be? And how do you think those two things interconnect?
So there's something that is selfish when it comes to my life mission, and I've accepted as being selfish. And this is what it is. I live with a very real fear. And my fear is that I'm going to be laying on my deathbed someday, and I'm going to regret the decisions I made in the life that I lived. The reality is, up until I started my journey as an entrepreneur, I really saw myself as a coward. And the actions I took were one of being a coward. I always tried to go the safe route. And I knew that based off of the journey I was on, eventually it will lead to the inevitable where I regret the life I lived. So I try to make decisions that are constantly pushing me forward and asking myself, would I be proud of myself in 50 years from now? That's the selfish side. But it's my mission to try to help as many people on my journey as possible. But of course, I can't help everybody. So the question becomes, who can I help? My goal is to try to help the Brian Drake from a year ago that started his journey as an entrepreneur, or the people that are working their full-time jobs and they want to start entrepreneurship, because the person I was has shifted so many times. I don't even the person I was a year ago is not the person you're having a conversation with right now. And I believe I'm a much better person than I was before. But I have to be patient if I really want to make an impact here, Kevin. I have to be patient and I have to wait until I see results in the way that I'm approaching life and the way that I'm making my decisions, to see results, to then turn around and say, hey, these were the results. Here was my mindset. Here are the actions I took. Here's how I can help you. And then at that point, try to help people on their path and really try to live out the desire that I've had my entire life. And that is to wake up one day feeling like you're financially free, feeling like your time is free to do with what you want, feeling like your life is yours. If I can do that for other people during my lifetime, then I feel like I will have fulfilled my life's purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Brian, I want to know how people can get connected with you, my friend, if they're so inclined to do that.
So my most active social media platform is LinkedIn. I do my most posting there. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Brian Drake. It might be at the Brian Drake. You can also find me on Instagram at the Brian Drake there. And then I also have a podcast myself, and it's called Influence. You're welcome to check it out. It's linked to my LinkedIn page as well. But as of right now, those are my platforms that anybody can reach out and connect with me on.
Well, fabulous, Brian. As I shared with you at the beginning and the onset of our conversation, you're joining the show today at a particularly interesting and impactful time for our show with today's conversation. It will be the 600th for the endeavor, so I really want to thank you for your expertise and knowledge in the field of entrepreneurship and webinars, and joining me today to help celebrate a milestone for the show. It's most appreciated.
You got it, Kevin. Thank you for this space to speak. I certainly appreciate it, my friend.